Welcome to Put Simply, the podcast that puts what's happening in the world simply without compromising on the details. Erdem Koch is my name, Rodney McCune and Ozan Ibrisim my co-hosts. Gents, wonderful to be back with you both.
Great to see you.
Good to see you, mate.
Well, this time last week, the world was holding its breath. Just as we hit the record button, a ceasefire was announced between Israel and Iran, apparently brokered by the US President Donald Trump. It, of course, followed the Iranian retaliation on the US attacks on its nuclear sites on the US military bases in Qatar, which then, of course, had the world holding its breath to see what would happen next. Turns out it was the theatre of the absurd, as many have called it. Lots of planning, lots of choreography, and the ceasefire that apparently didn't last very long and then was sort of back on, which was sort of what you predicted, Ozan. Take us through what happened. I mean, there was this talk of a ceasefire. It was kind of broken by both parties, and now 1 week on, we're not even talking about the Israel-Iran conflict. I mean, it's a kind of a sign of our times, but put it as simply as possibly you can.
Well, I mean, it's going to be a challenge. However, at the time of recording last week, as you said, we were discussing various kind of doomsday scenarios, or a scenario of a potential ceasefire that might hold, might not hold. And I think once we recorded and dropped the episode, about an hour later, the ceasefire was broken, as you said, by both of the parties. And it seems that it was a bit of a mistake. But what was very interesting was Trump's response to that. I think for the first time since he's been elected, we saw him show his true emotions about how Israel's dealing with this sort of stuff. And there's now that famous doorstop of him being interviewed by the media and him finishing his remarks with, I don't know what the F they're doing. But they're both kind of, he was trying to insinuate that they're both off track, and he was very upset about it, etc. So that seemed to bring things back in order a little bit, and it seems like now the ceasefire is holding. As you said, the world's moved on to the next big thing, which seems to be the budget bill, which I'm sure we'll discuss shortly. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of talk about it. Of course, there was a level of nervousness, and we touched on this in the last episode, after Iran bombed or attempted to bomb an army base in Qatar, in Doha. But what has really become clear is that all of those countries, or all of the countries, are really playing to their domestic political audience. Iran, I believe, and I think this is now being confirmed, has effectively gave a heads up to the US before it bombed that army base. The US, again, there's talk of giving a heads up to the Iranians, but again, they didn't have to give a heads up because effectively the president was tweeting about it, or truth socialing about it, whatever you call it. In fact, one of the senior defense organizers or defense officers from the Department of Defense on background told the media that effectively the biggest threat during the planning of this operation was the president himself, in terms of the success of the operation, because he kept on going on social media and flagging that he was going to bomb Iran, etc. So it was all theatre. I'm not sure we have at all fixed the longer term problem. Now, there's a big debate going on about the success of the US strikes against the nuclear positions, or the nuclear facilities. The Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, conducted a very colourful media conference late last week where he effectively accused all of the media of raining on him and the president's parade. And accuse them of, instead of being patriotic and applauding and talking about how this is the greatest military operation in world history, they were trying to undermine the success of it. In fact, he had a go at one of the Fox News correspondents, who I think objectively is characterized as probably one of the best reporters of this whole conflict over the last 2 weeks, and he told her that she was the worst when it came to trying to undermine and put doubt into people's minds around the success of this whole operation. So there's a big effort to try and spin this as a massive success. Um, the intelligence community seem a little bit split on it. There seems to be now, I think, from the Atomic Energy Agency, which is the independent agency that's responsible for monitoring these things. I believe the comments they're making is that the bombing by the US significantly reduced or set back Iran's nuclear program, but they weren't sure that it had completely killed it off. So that seems to be where most people are falling, which again comes back to what we were discussing last week. This is not a solution. Bombing that wasn't a solution. The only solution to this, which was being implemented before Trump pulled out of it, was a deal, a diplomatic deal, where they could ensure that Iran met its obligations when it comes to not pursuing a nuclear program. So it's all up in the air, but media's moved on. So I guess the whole world is moving on now.
Where's Trump at, do you think, Rodney? Because, to Ozan's point of when he gave that press conference by the plane or the helicopter, I think it was rather, and he said, they both don't know what the F they're doing, both Iran and Israel. I mean, how much of this is successful for him and for his base in the US? How much has he been able to, I guess, spin it or play to either his base or even the swinging votes, really, in terms of the quote unquote success of what has now happened in Iran?
So I think, I mean, politically, he risked his base by undertaking this operation, and there was heavy media effort by numerous figures to say in advance the president's position's always been and post that Iran should never have a nuclear weapon, rather than it being some grand departure from the non-interventionist platform that he had campaigned on. No more ever wars, no more foreign wars, no more American involvement, etc., etc. But the reason I think he took a risk with the base to depart from it and back to the Iran shouldn't have a nuclear weapon uh, position was because he saw it as a pathway for him to get credit for scaling down the conflict. So rather than have Israel continually involved in some attritional effort to degrade weapons or nuclear infrastructure in Iran, he just stepped in and said, "No, it's done. Peace, and I'm the peacemaker." And when he said they don't know what they're at or they don't know what they're doing, I think it's because he doesn't get that they don't see what he wants out of it, and what he wants out of it is to secure a peace deal that he can go off and get credit for. I mean, there's stuff that's so delusional, being put around about maybe Iran will now join the Abraham Accords. It's basically insane and so far. He's just desperate to get credit for for doing some sort of peace deal. Was it represent as the foreign ministers of Rwanda and who was it last week he had in the Oval Office? Was it the Congo? Would that be right? Can't remember. Because no one else really gets to say anything. And he brought a correspondent behind the desk who had been reporting on the only Africa outlet correspondent in the approved list at the White House, who had to stand and tell the other media how amazing Trump is thought of in the countries in which he had brought peace, and and they should have the head of the African Union come to who clearly Trump didn't know who that was and tried to bluster his way through it in this most like consistently stupid way that he does. And yeah, and it was all about me, the peacemaker. I think it's as shallow as that, sadly. And it's not about making peace for good reason, for humanitarian reasons, for global stability reasons, for economic reasons, for whatever. It's not, it's down to if I do this and then I claim credit for it, then I can maybe get a prize. Why do I want that prize? Obama had that prize. He shouldn't have had that prize. I should have had that prize. I'm better than Obama. I need to get that prize. I'm now in my second term. I need to get it before the end of my second term. Let's start early. Let's find all these conflicts where I can be the peacemaker. I also think that's affected his position vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine, that he's trying to be someone who brokers peace rather than takes a side. I know there's other issues at play, but I do think like it's that basic. And I didn't want to think it was that basic, because I'd hoped that there was some genuine sort of thinking behind it. But I do think that everything he does comes back to self. What's in it for me? And I also think that's why he's able to deal with all the, the negative publicity and the focus on some of the bad stuff that he's done, and he just lies his way out of it because it's all about him and it's all about whatever um he can get out of things. It's all about wins for him. It's just, yeah, and that's all he really cares about in terms of these types of outcomes. Like he doesn't really care whether Israel's looked after, beyond the fact that he can say that he gets credit for something. Um, yeah, it's pretty poor all round, frankly. Is that too dramatic? Ozan?
No, I mean, I think you've nailed it. This is not we're not talking about a group of genius foreign policy experts playing 4D chess with international relations here. The incentives for all parties are very basic, and that is to look good to their domestic audience. And unfortunately, what we have is hundreds of people killed in um, senseless conflict, which at the end of the day, never needed to happen, and it wouldn't have happened most likely if there was better leadership and just a more strategic kind of way to deal with Iran's nuclear aspirations. And look, Biden also had 4 years to fix this, and he didn't. So I think there's you've got to put some responsibility on that. Um, uh, some could argue that he was a little bit distracted by the Russia-Ukraine war and then subsequently October 7 and what happened there. So that might have kind of taken up most of the foreign policy bandwidth. But there was not really, I suppose, appetite from all of Europe and allies to fix the Iranian or come with a solution for the Iranians. Europe needed to show more leadership and what have you. So we now found ourselves in a situation which is almost perfectly made for reality TV, and that's what Trump's looking at. As you said, Rodney, his incentives are very different to perhaps perhaps other presidents who have come before him, and it makes for great television, and what we've seen is great television. And I'm not sure he's going to pay a political price for it. If you look at some of the numbers, the approval numbers, there's still kind of big disparity between different polls, but there doesn't seem to be a significant hit on his poll numbers. So I would argue that he might have missed a bullet politically on this one, or Mr. Missile, whatever you want to call it, in this one.
He also did, of course, drop mineral access to mineral rights in as part of the Great Win during the Congo Rwanda peace deal. So there's another thing that's in it for him.
How much of the I mean, I hate this phrase because, when people say the 24-hour news cycle or the modern media or whatever, I mean, it's like, okay, thank you. That's been around for 15 years now. But to me, it's bewildering how quickly not only does the media move on, but I think the political cycles sort of move on. And obviously the big, beautiful bill, which we'll get to in a moment, is something that is very much top of mind, I should say. From a Republican perspective, they've got a self-imposed deadline before the 4th of July holiday later this week in the US. But also, in terms of some of the up-and-coming members of the Democratic Party or the left rather, in terms of what's happening in New York, which we'll get to as well. To me, it's fascinating how quickly they are able to move the media cycle on. And, Rodney, you pointed out last week, I think on the podcast, of what does this mean in terms of what happened between Israel and Iran for the ongoing war in Gaza as well, and what is being inflicted there on the Palestinian people and the broader region. And I think that is absolutely playing here as well, and we are seeing sort of issues in Gaza and more death and more destruction, and this sort of, I don't know if the apathy is the right word, but I guess reluctance to engage or even report on some of these things, to me is bewildering. But let's continue with the Trump theme and let's have a look at domestically what is happening. Let's touch on the big, beautiful bill. Will it pass both houses, do you think, Rodney, by the 4th of July, which is the self-imposed deadline by Trump and the Republicans?
A version of the big, beautiful bill will pass both houses. Whether it's by the 4th of July or not, I can't say. I also know that they love deadlines, and even if they miss, then they don't really care. They just make up that wasn't the actual deadline. It's like some sort of the biblical 7 days when it came to solving Ukraine within 24 hours. Well, I didn't mean 24 hours, 24 hours. I meant a longer 24 hours, but the reference to 24 hours was that it would be done as quickly as possible. Oh, right, that's what you meant by 24 hours, not that it would be done as quickly as possible. Got it. So timeframes don't really mean anything. Doing it by the 4th of July, it'll be which year? Or is it the 4th of July somewhere else under some other version of a calendar? Yeah, they'll just figure it out. I'm not sure they'll make the deadline. The rebellion has sort of started and a little bit fizzled out with Tom Tillis going after Trump and pointing out the impact on less well-off Americans of this big, beautiful bill. It's not that popular on some polling that's been done broadly with the electorate. But of course, Trump, not realizing Tillis had an intention of not running again, already said he wouldn't be reselected through the primary process, or he'd be opposed should he seek to run again. And then he sort of, put his thumb on his nose and waved his fingers and said, I'm not running again. So that's a bit of a hollow threat. And then Musk weighed in yesterday with his threat to fund anyone who runs against someone who supports the bill. So that's sort of to counterbalance the threat on the other side. But it's all pretty depressing. It makes me wonder whether the primary system's that good. That these people influence who's picked by their own side through sort of like a half election, because that's what it is, really. It's not like it's a proper test of public opinion. It's test of the opinion of a particular bloc that becomes nearly as hotly contested as the election itself. And already, the seat's warming up for who's going to go in North Carolina. I think Lara Trump now is considering that as an option. And, obviously the name's a negative, but she doesn't have the genes being married into the family. So maybe that's a good thing in terms of her candidacy, or maybe her intellect. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. The primary system, maybe there's a little bit of this in terms of the whole New York thing. I'm not convinced anymore that this is actually, the outcomes I'm looking at, and I'm just like, don't know. And the way it's being manipulated now to try and get legislation passed, people aren't voting in favor of this bill in order to satisfy their electorate. uh, for self-preservation to continue winning elections. They're doing it to be selected against the effective party leader hierarchy in Trump, vis-a-vis some external large funder in Musk. And that, that's the rock and the hard place. Where's the electorate? Where's the people who are affected by it in the discussion? Is it just that Tillis is the only one who's able to zero in on that because he said he's not running again, and that gives him the freedom to actually do what he was elected to do, which is to serve the people who live in the area where he was elected, not just obviously those who voted for him, but serve the broader geography. I don't know, pretty depressing all around to see the way this sort of pans out in American politics. I mean, maybe it's not dissimilar to selection processes in the UK for Westminster seats, where it's all sort of traded by a political party, but it's behind closed doors rather than out in the open. I don't know. Are you either of you excited by primaries? Do you think that it is a good system?
I think, I mean, the principle is good, but where the US is today, with pretty much a very polarized electorate and the way that they run them, which obviously, disenfranchises a lot of people, etc. The way it's set up today, I think, pretty much has all of the wrong incentive structures for people, because at the end of the day, if you're running in, I don't know, North Dakota, which is what, probably a 30 Trump electorate state, if you want to get elected in that state, you have to appease Trump and his small band of followers, who are not the majority of that state, because they're the ones that are going to be voting for you, and that means that what you end up with are effectively many people who are just very partisan and are all appeasing a very small, not a very small, but a small part of the broader population. And if you have a look at the electoral map, 25, 30 years ago, when you had a congressional election, you would have seen that there were probably about 60, 70 congressional seats at play because the electorate wasn't as polarized. But today, in 2026, I think the list is about 20 or 30. Or even less, even 10. So it means that, with the tribalism and the polarization, that there are no longer kind of marginal electorates or many few swing states or swing kinds, which means that on both sides, those who go through the current primary system all have to appease a very radical part of their party, because they're the diehards that are going to come out and vote in primaries. Now, there's been a lot of talk in the US about changing the primary system. I think is it Alaska, or anyway, one of the states has a different primary system where it's kind of more, a bit more resembling an Australian system where it's proportional. So it's not first past the post, and it's open to pretty much everyone. So effectively, you have two elections where anyone can go out there and vote, and it's kind of choice rank, I think they call it. You get to select your rankings. So the people who come out of this system are very different people, because they need to be of a very different mentality and be talking about issues that resonate beyond just the base, the Trump MAGA base, or in the Democrats' case, quite radical left base that the Democrats have in some very deep blue states. So yeah, the system, I like the idea of people going out and voting to select candidates as a principle, but the way it's right now structured in the US with the political climate, it's completely broken. And this is why we've got these people in Congress, who are just mad. Most of them are,
basically.
most of the more the Republican side. I think there are a few mad people on the Democratic side as well, but most of the members of the Congress are absolutely insane. They're people that you should not be representing the broader population in any way, shape, or form. Now, to come back to the big beautiful budget bill, because I think on that primary stuff we should devote a whole another podcast and get someone in who probably understands the system better than I do, certainly. But on the big beautiful bill, it's been called many things, but Trump likes to refer to it as the big beautiful bill. I agree with Rodney. I think some form of it will pass. What's also been very interesting is the Senate has this process whereby it has a Senate parliamentarian whose job is effectively to look through bills to make sure that they fit a whole bunch of rules of the Senate, etc. So it's kind of like an oversight of bills that come before the Senate before they can be debated. And there's a provision which allows budget bills to ensure that they can pass to go through with 50 plus one senators. Otherwise, any other bill that needs to go through is obviously open to the filibuster, which, to put simply, is effectively a mechanism in the Senate where you can go and talk for, if you want, 50 hours, and this has been the case in other bills, and just talk about anything that you want to ensure a bill doesn't pass. And to break that filibuster, or to break that mechanism, you need 59, I think, votes, 59 or 60 votes to break that. So no party has 60 votes in the Senate. So however, this budget bill has a whole bunch of things in it that don't fit the criteria that the parliamentarian has put. And so she came out last week and said that some of these provisions in this bill don't fit that, so they have to go through a separate mechanism, which then would be impossible for it to get through, because then the Democrats could use the filibuster, as the Republicans have used the filibuster, and just keep delaying it indefinitely. Again, another podcast probably on the filibuster, because it is an appalling system, appalling way to run a government. But that's for another day. So she has said that some provisions don't work. And then, of course, you had some of these mad people we talked about, some of these MAGA senators coming out and calling for her to be sacked. And, how can an unelected bureaucrat tell us what to do with senators, etc.? So they all had a mini stroke. It seems that some of her concerns have been addressed, and certain changes have been made, although at the time of recording, I believe she's still raised a number of concerns. So it has already been changed, and from what I can understand, it's been changed beyond what the House sent. So, for example, the deficit will increase. What the Senate has changed it to means more people. Right now, it's about estimated 10 or 11 million people will lose access to health insurance through the Affordable Healthcare program that was set up by Obama. It looks like that might increase by 1 or 2 more. So you might have 13, 14 million people losing their health insurance and healthcare opportunities by 2034 or something like that. And there's further deeper cuts to Medicaid, I believe. So, we talked a little bit about the political impact of Iran and Israel conflict on Trump, but I think from a political point of view, there are bigger landmines in this for him than anything else, because, some of those provisions, such as, the SNAP program, which is effectively food stamps, those being cut, Medicaid being cut, all to make room for an increase in the Pentagon and defense budget. But most importantly, those things are being cut to make room for the continuation of the tax breaks and the lowering of the tax rates that Trump achieved in his first term, for those to be extended. So massive budget blowout, completely not a Republican policy or a traditional Republican policy of fiscal conservatism, and a lot of those types of things that are being put forward and may pass the Senate are very deeply unpopular, not just across the board, but also in the MAGA base as well. So I think some big political problems are ahead for Trump. It'll be interesting to see how he manages it, and it'll be interesting to see what the Senate sends back to the House, because according to the procedure, the Senate has to pass something, and then the House has to ratify what the Senate has changed. So there might be even further problems there. But yeah, the July 4 kind of deadline, they're going to have to do some real kind of negotiating to meet that deadline.
Yeah, well put and well explained there, Ozan. We spoke about primaries and elections and I guess sort of people coming through the ranks. One person who's, to many, has sort of come out of nowhere is the Democratic nominee is the word I was looking for. I was going to say the Democratic Republican. That doesn't make sense. The Democratic nominee for the New York mayoral race is a gentleman called Zohran Mamdani. Mamdani, of course, the Republicans find a way to always mispronounce his name. Even some people on the Democratic side mispronounce his name. But talk to us about Mamdani, Rodney. Who is he? He's a young sort of guy who's in many ways, used social media and all sorts of things really well to get the nomination. Will he win is, I guess, a first question. And who is he and what's the prospects for his political future in the US?
Well, and let me start with will he win? The answer is it's quite possible that he'll win, given it's New York, although they have clearly voted for Republicans in the past. It's an urban area that tends to be more supportive of the Democrats. So getting through the primary system is a big positive on the journey to get elected. He's a Ugandan-born immigrant, grew up in New York. I think he dabbled in hip hop or something at one time. And he was considered to be massively an underdog to formerly disgraced Cuomo, which is a funny way of describing anyone who's been disgraced, because the fact of their disgrace remains. But he was formerly disgraced because it happened a while ago, and clearly there was some belief that the electorate would be very forgiving and understanding of that. So therefore he was pitched into one to run as the most likely winner, and no, he didn't. And Mamdani won through a grassroots campaign. He sounds impressive. He grounded his campaign on the cost of living for New Yorkers, and he clearly spoke to a section of voters who, haven't felt that politicians who are talking about global conflicts and other things are really listening to them. So it's a point where the Democrats are clearly connecting with their base through this younger voice who's really speaking about the issues that are affecting New Yorkers on transport, on housing, on cost of living, etc., etc. So yeah, I'm young, early 30s, I think. So yeah, this is quite a positive. I did hear Giuliani, I don't know what he was on, wittering on about not making it about the faith background of Zohran Mamdani, etc. But yeah, within 2 seconds he was then talking about 9/11 and Muslim candidature, etc., etc. Wholly depressing, and no doubt that will feature. He also was throwing in that New York was once the biggest Jewish city in the world, etc. So you can see where the Republicans are likely to go on this, even from one moment or 1 minute snippet of Giuliani. So yeah, it'll probably be a very depressing election when you have someone who's young, who's connecting with voters, who has ideas, who isn't identifying themselves or limiting themselves to their faith background as their political thinking.
I mean, some of the responses from the Republicans have just been awful and
really bad,
racist and horrific. But it just goes to show what type of party they are these days. And many of them, if the question is this an unusual Democratic candidate? I think the answer is yes, probably. Is he too young to run New York, the biggest city, one of the biggest cities in the world? The answer is yes, probably. But the real question should be, why was he elected? And Rodney touched on this and explained it well. And the answer to that is it's he managed to energize a part of the base, and young people outside of the Democratic base who really feel like they're not getting what they want, from the leaders that currently exist in the political ecosystem. And he managed to energize them, and he managed to get them on board. It's quite unbelievable, to be honest with you. I mean, he was 25, 30. He was sitting on about 3% 4 or 5 months ago. And Andrew Cuomo, who is the disgraced candidate, who has dozens of sexual harassment cases against him, he was well and truly ahead in the polls. But people were not given a proper choice, and people thought, okay, well, we can't. I mean, we can't support Andrew Cuomo, and not to mention the current mayor, who's a Democrat, who affected Eric Adams of
Eric
Turkish
Adams.
Airlines fame, was effectively charged with bribery because he'd accepted a whole bunch of gifts from Turkish Airlines, and then decided that he would get a pardon from Donald Trump in return for the quid pro quo was that he would allow ICE to run free reign in the city of New York. So, I mean, this is the type of candidates that the Democratic Party or the establishment are putting up. It's no surprise that someone with, questionable experience, questionable background, maybe even in terms of where he comes from, and I mean that from an experience point of view. He might seem quite radical to a few maybe centre Democrats or establishment Democrats, but of course it's no surprise that people are going to find, interest in this candidate. They're going to be empowered. They're going to be energized by someone like him. Now, a lot of the things he's talking about doing, let's see whether he can do it or not. He's talking about things that we should all probably think as great initiatives, like free bus services and trying to deal with the housing problem and what have you. And he's got some pretty radical ideas around some of that stuff. But this is no surprise, and this is again another opportunity for the Democrats to take a hard look at themselves and figure out what is wrong with their party. I mean, there is a major brand problem when the people that seem to make it through the ranks and files are, is a disgraced former governor of New York, and the person who's going to be running as an independent is a bloke who's been pardoned, a former Democrat who's been pardoned by Trump for taking bribes. Like, he's going to win. There's no doubt about that. I think that's there's nobody that's likely to kind of come anywhere near him. And the people who are going to vote for him, they've shown they're not going to vote for Cuomo. I mean, Cuomo did appallingly. Usually with New York primaries, you have a second round of kind of preferences and what have you. But Cuomo conceded defeat in a couple of hours. It was that much of an overwhelming majority that he was able to achieve. So yeah, it should be another wake-up call in the line of many wake-up calls for the last 12, 18 months, 2 years for the Democrats to just get their shit together. I mean, this is an absolute joke. And, they need to support this guy, and they need to show that they are the party of energy and young people.
The future, not the
future, yeah.
With a vision and
absolutely.
a direction and everything else you need to do. Sorry.
Absolutely. And many people will tell you, many people smarter than me when it comes to analyzing election results, but many people will tell you that right now, the one big determinant of election results is young people. They're hard to get out, they're hard to connect with, but whoever does end up connecting with them ends up winning. We saw that in Australia, we saw that with Trump, and now we've seen it in New York. So, guys, I mean, let's just have a think about what that means. And rather than going on about how it's going to be, this person is not necessarily representative of the Democratic Party or may hold views that are not necessarily representative of the Democratic Party, etc. I mean, the Democratic Party doesn't have the luxury to have discussions like this. They are in deep, deep trouble. So they should really learn from this. Sorry, I got a bit animated. I usually get animated about Trump, but the Democratic response to this has really pissed me off.
But surely, I mean, for the Democrats, young people are not a voter base that's hard to win for them. I mean, by their standing and their position in what's happening in the world and the disillusions of what's happening in the US and Trump's first sort of 6-7 months and the things that he's done. I mean, yes, the Republicans won over the young vote by an extraordinary swing in the last election, but that was because of an absence of the Democrats sort of going into that segment, I guess, of the population. Like now, there's an incredible record of Trump. There's a lot to talk about over the things that he has done and has not done. And to your point, it's relatively low-hanging fruit to just get your shit together and appeal to that base. And Mamdani's shown that it can be done in ways that, so much of the odds were also stacked up against him as well, at least from a perception perspective and a public relations perspective. It can be done. And if it's not going to be done by the Democrats, then, well, there's a new political party on the block, potentially, led by Elon Musk. What's happening there, Rodney?
Well, they're just in discussions with Eric Adams to see whether he's willing to take up the leadership of that party, but apparently he's negotiating hard for 10% of Tesla on his usual behavior.
But look, I mean, jokes aside, I think there are some very basic things that they can do. I mean, start promoting as leaders of the party, people who are not on average 50 years older than the average young person voting. That could be a really good start to do that. Get rid of dinosaurs like Chuck Schumer, etc., as the perceived leaders of the party. And then once you start to actually look like a modern progressive party, which is what they're claiming to be, that represents young people and other people who believe in kind of center-left progressive views, etc. Once you start to look like that, then you can have conversations about the details of whether a certain policy is too radical for the broader electorate. Do they need to go to the center a bit on certain things, etc. But right now you have an appalling brand, and you're talking about whether this is too radical for, guys, get back to basics, fix up the house. I mean, the house is burning and you're worried about saving your TV and running out with the TV. Like, the place is about to crumble. It's appalling. It's just
but their establishment, Ozan, they're not going to vote for people, are not going to say, everyone, you need a whole slate of candidates who don't fit the profile that we currently fill. And that's part of the problem, right? The decision makers are the people who benefit from the current system, who aren't prepared to say, we need to have a whole new raft of young, energetic, fresh thinking candidates, because it actually means replacing themselves. And Trump's Musk's new party idea, it feels like he just wants the old Republican Party back in some weird way, where they're just fiscally conservative, and that's his real gripe at the moment. But
most of the country wants the old Republican Party back.
Yeah, but they're not prepared to vote for it. So again,
No.
they might want it back, but they still quite like this current, whatever it is, incarnation of the Tea Party on steroids or whatever it is. But yeah, I mean, beyond that, what else has Musk said that his new party's going to stand for? Nobody quite knows. It's he's annoyed that instead of the big beautiful bill being a cost cutting exercise, that they're cutting costs in welfare or medical, Medicare or social support, but they're offsetting that by cutting taxes for the rich at the same time, right? He doesn't care either about all those people who are going to be affected by the cut in healthcare support and other things. He just wants it not to be offset against tax cuts for the rich. Um, that's, I mean, as well as obviously
Look,
subsidies for EVs and whatever.
if I was advising Elon Musk, I would say, look, cut the effort required to set up this new party, etc. You're aggrieved that you put your money behind a bunch of people who've let you down and what have you. Fine. The best way to deal with that is to start cutting checks for whichever Democratic super PAC will accept your checks. Because let's face it, his brand is dead. He has so much baggage. He's effectively toxic in the kind of
So that's
non-MAGA
why it's
world.
hard for them to take his money, right? So that's
Exactly,
why he's floating
exactly,
around the idea of a new party.
exactly. But it's not going to go anywhere because I mean, who's going to vote for this new party? Like, it's not like there are a bunch of people going around going, I have centre left views, and or even on the other side, there might be a bunch of people who are probably going, okay, I want the old Republican Party back, and I believe in conservative values such as fiscal discipline and what have you, etc. But I mean, what does Elon Musk offer these people beyond a few tweets? Nothing, because he's so tied himself to this MAGA brand of, and most of those conservatives are going to very much disagree with Elon Musk on many other ideas that he might have around AI and, the kind of free regulation of things like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. So this guy is all over the place when it comes to these things. And, it's not like most of those fiscal conservatives are going to agree with massive subsidies to electric vehicles, sorry. So there is no lane for him, if you ask me, of a considerable base of people. He might find some joy with a whole bunch of people who are so pissed off with both parties, but that's not going to last very long, because once they start to dig a bit deeper into what this guy actually stands for, they're going to go, hang on, this guy is just as bad as the others. He's just in it for himself.
He's basically ordering white wine with the steak, right? It might be what he likes, but it has no consistency.
I don't know, mate. That's too sophisticated for me. I'm a beer guy. So.
Well, speaking of money being thrown around, Jeff Bezos, he had a wedding over this last sort of few days, and Rodney, I know you were following it very, very closely.
So I know it took place in Venice, and that some people were crossing. They were throwing inflatable crocodiles in the beautiful waters of Venice, and it caused some controversy. And he wanted to close off something, but I mean, I don't even know. Like, so what? Do you know what I mean? He's
What? So what? That a billionaire got married?
yeah, exactly. So what? I didn't even know who he got married to, but presumably someone who is younger, probably attractive, probably says she was taken by his smile and his lack of hair, and no, the fact that he has extreme wealth doesn't um doesn't um doesn't play as a factor in anything. I don't know. Who did he marry? I mean, do either of you know, or are we just saying it's Jeff Bezos? Because it's both their wedding. That's the first thing we have to acknowledge. Who did Jeff Bezos?
Lauren Sanchez.
Is she successful in her own right? What TV media? What does she
She's
do?
a media personality, news anchor. So she's on
Not
Fox
too
and
difficult
stuff.
to guess this stuff,
So,
you know what I mean?
but yeah, no, you guessed it well. Yeah, you got the profile right.
Yeah, so look, so what? Get married in Venice, and it's lovely. And the worst time to go to Venice is probably June, given vast number of tourists and so on. I don't know.
Look,
Um,
I've been interested in this story for different reasons. I agree with everything you said, Ronnie, but what I find appalling is, I divide the responsibility for this appalling kind of display of wealth and what have you at a time when, we've got multiple wars going on. 13 million people are about to lose their healthcare in one of the most advanced countries, or if not the most richest and advanced country in the world, etc. Like, there's some really bad stuff going on. But I give the responsibility half to Jeff Bezos. I think, he doesn't need to do this. And the second bit of the responsibility I give is to the media, because this is an ecosystem where the media needs to feed off stories like this, because it's all over the place. And Jeff Bezos is feeding that media beast. And they're both of them. They're both culprits in this, and they're both responsible for this. And I think it's just appalling. Like, why are we talking about? Why is this taking up any area in media? Like, it's $20 million he spent on a wedding, which is probably cheap compared to, I'm sure, some of the dinners that he's run for his friends. So he showed, I believe, some discipline when it came to fiscal responsibility there. But at the end of the day, it's an appalling display of luxury, and just, it's grotesque. Like, it's just not, it's unnecessary. But we're all responsible because we're all consuming it. We're talking about it. But at the end of the day, this is just not necessary, and people in Venice should be throwing more blow up crocodiles or whatever they're throwing at the guests.
I
really
don't
not.
know what the form of protest was. That was speculative on my part.
No, there were protests in Venice for, I think, a number of reasons. One was kind of down the line that I've been talking about, in terms of, this is not a time when the world's falling apart to be doing this sort of stuff and showing it off. And others, I think it was just Venetians who were annoyed at the fact that suddenly the world's media and Kim Kardashian came to town.
I'm more worried the fact he's taken his eye off the space race. I mean, Musk's much more efficient at these things. He's not focusing on love and marriage. He's just having children and building rockets. And yeah, he's got a different outlook in life. Musk's getting an advantage through Bezos getting married in Venice.
Yeah, Bezos. I mean, they always say, mate, love is a distracting thing. So this is Elon needs more love in his life, clearly.
Hard man to love, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, he did with Trump, but I guess that broke up. So that love affair is over.
As much as any man can love another man, that's what he said.
Yeah.
Oh, things end dramatically.
Well, a great way, on a love note for a change, to end this wonderful episode of Put Simply. Gents, thank you so much for your time this week. See you next.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And that's been this week's episode of Put Simply. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn at Oroka Group to stay up to date with all the latest episodes and news. Feel free to leave a comment and suggestions on what you'd like to see featured on the podcast as well. Until next time, I'm Erdem Koch.
And I'm Ozan Ibrisim.
Thanks for listening.